Dennis O'Malley woke before sunrise on a Monday in Phoenix, the house too quiet, the desert air moving through the open kitchen window like a careful breath. And he remembered that Linda was gone. 43 years of marriage had ended 2 weeks earlier with a sudden collapse at the breakfast table, and since then the rooms felt wrong, as if the walls were listening for a voice that would not return. He moved slowly, made coffee the way she liked, 2 scoops, a pinch of cinnamon, a habit he could not break, and stood at the sink looking into the small backyard where the bougainvillea climbed the block wall. He told himself to keep busy, to water plants, to sort the mail, to call the utility company about a strange charge, to fold the quilts Linda had washed and left in the basket. But grief worked like heat. It pressed down and made every small task feel heavy. That afternoon, his son, Victor, arrived with his wife, Kelsey, carrying a stack of glossy pamphlets and a plastic file box with colored tabs. They hugged him in the doorway, said all the proper things, and then Kelsey laid the brochures on the dining table that Linda had polished every Friday. "Independent living," she said brightly. "Games, a shuttle, no stairs. You'll have friends your own age." Victor nodded and kept patting Dennis's shoulder in short, careful taps. "Dad, we can handle the paperwork," he added, as if paperwork were a storm, and he alone owned an umbrella. Dennis listened and stared at the photos of beaming seniors playing shuffleboard under fake blue skies and felt something small and sharp catch under his ribs. He thanked them, said he would think about it, and walked them out. At the curb, he noticed 2 large suitcases in the back of their SUV. He pretended not to see them. The next days were a loop of tasks and silence. He sorted Linda's craft room by color because that was how she kept it, pencil labels on every bin. He left her slippers under the bed because moving them felt like erasing her. On Thursday, Victor came again without calling first. Kelsey followed with a clipboard. "Dad," Victor said, using the same tone he used when he was 12 and trying to sell a story, "Kelsey's firm needs us closer to downtown, and this house is perfect for us. Big yard for the kids. Good schools. You shouldn't be alone out here." Dennis heard the words but did not accept them. "This is my home," he said quietly. Victor's smile tightened. He set a blue ribbon document on the table. "Mom left me the house and the assets," he said. "It's all here. You can stay for a while, out of kindness, but you need a place that fits your needs." Dennis picked up the paper and felt his heart start a slow, firm beat in his ears. The seal looked wrong. The font looked wrong. And Linda never used her middle initial on signature lines. He did not know law, but he knew his wife's habits the way a carpenter knows the sound of his own hammer. "Your mother would not do this," he said. Victor's eyes cooled. "Dad, you never understood finances," he said, glancing at his watch. "This is better for everyone. I made a reservation at Suncrest Inn near I-17. It's simple and safe." Dennis imagined the motel before he saw it. Thin towels, old carpet, a rattling AC. He thought of Linda's quilts and the way she tucked corners tight enough to bounce a coin. He thought of the pear tree dish towel that always hung straight on the oven handle. He looked at his son and waited for some softness to show, a crack in the hard set of his jaw. There was none. "Pack what you need," Victor said, already lifting a suitcase. "We'll come back for the rest once we sort the estate." The words landed like grit in the mouth. Dennis moved through the bedroom in a slow, careful circle, choosing shirts, socks, the watch Linda gave him on their 40th, the small box of photographs they both loved, the one of them at Saguaro National Park wearing hats too big for their faces. He left Linda's slippers where they were. Kelsey stood in the doorway, smiling with her lips and not her eyes. "You'll love the activities," she said. "There's bingo on Wednesdays." In the driveway, Victor loaded the suitcases with the neat efficiency of a man taking out trash. On the way to the motel, the truck radio played an ad for a real estate team that promised fast offers and clean titles. Dennis watched the streets pass. The low stucco homes, the Palo Verde trees, the faded banners for a festival that had already ended. The Suncrest Inn was as he imagined. The clerk slid a key across the counter without looking up. The room smelled of lemon cleaner and old smoke. The AC croaked like it had swallowed a screw. Victor set the suitcases down and handed Dennis $200 in 20s. "Just for a few days," he said, "until we settle everything." Then he added the sentence that would wake Dennis later like a slap. Find somewhere else to die. You're useless now." The door closed. The truck left. The room hummed with the heavy air of things that should not be. Dennis sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the popcorn ceiling, trying to breathe steady. He could feel Linda beside him in memory, not touching, just sitting, making a list in her tidy hand, tapping her pen against her front teeth when she solved something. He pictured the blue-ribboned paper again, the wrong seal, the wrong font. He took out his phone and opened the photo he had snapped before Victor pulled the document away. He zoomed in and saw a notary stamp from a name he did not recognize, and a date that did not match the day Linda had gone to the attorney months earlier. He remembered how she had come home from that meeting, set a folder in the safe, and said, "It's all clear now, Denny. If life throws a dust storm at you, you'll have a map." He had laughed then and kissed her cheek and said, "You and your maps." Now he felt the map pulling at him like a path through mesquite. In the morning, he counted the cash, folded it into his wallet, and caught the city bus downtown. The courthouse area always felt cooler, even in June, as if the tall buildings cast a different kind of shade. He walked into the office of Ortega and Mayhew because that was the name on the folder Linda had kept, and because he trusted the memory of her confidence more than his son's rehearsed concern. The receptionist looked up and softened when he gave his name. "Mr. O'Malley," she said, "we tried to reach you for the reading. Your son said you were traveling." Traveling. The lie sat neat and square on the counter like another wrong document. "Is Mr. Ortega in?" Dennis asked. He felt the small, sharp thing under his ribs turn into a clear point. He would put the wrong paper on the right desk and ask the plain question. He would follow Linda's map. He would find out who had changed the truth. Outside, the heat pressed the city flat. Inside, the elevator was cool and bright. As the doors closed, Dennis saw his reflection in the brushed steel. An older man in a clean shirt, carrying a worn leather folder, standing straight. He did not feel useless. He felt ready. The mystery had started in his own home, at his own table, with a ribbon and a lie. Now it was moving toward the place where real names and real dates would either confirm a son's kindness or expose a son's crime. He hoped for one outcome, feared the other, and kept walking when the elevator opened, because the only way to learn the truth was to step through the door and ask for it. Dennis stepped into Samuel Ortega's office and felt the same quiet order he remembered from years ago, when Linda had insisted they make the paperwork behave. And now, as the door closed with a soft latch, that memory steadied him like a hand at his elbow. Ortega rose from behind a walnut desk, lean and gray-haired, and greeted him with a firm grip and a clear, "I'm sorry for your loss," then waved him toward a chair while the receptionist brought a glass of water and a small legal pad. The lawyer did not waste words. He pulled a thick, tabbed file labeled O'Malley, Estate, and slipped on reading glasses. And Dennis watched those precise hands open to a page that carried Linda's familiar looped signature, the one he had seen on birthday cards, school forms, and mortgage renewals. "Dennis," Ortega said evenly, "we held the will reading last week, but your son informed us you were traveling and too distraught to attend. He accepted a copy on your behalf." And Dennis felt a small heat rise in his chest, not from Arizona air, but from the neat shape of that lie. Ortega placed the original will on a bookstand so it stood upright, then read slowly, as if each word needed to land in the right place. "I, Linda Mae O'Malley, bequeath to my husband, Dennis Patrick O'Malley, our primary residence at 114 West Bethany, Phoenix, including all furnishings and personal effects, and 70% of all financial assets and accounts, totaling approximately $23 million. Dennis heard the numbers but did not reach for them, because what mattered first was that Linda had left him the house, their house, the rooms that held her quilts and his tools, and the soft pear tree dish towel. Ortega turned a page and continued. "To my son, Victor Allen O'Malley, I leave $10 million to be held in trust, with distributions beginning on his 45th birthday, contingent upon his treatment of his father after my death. If he mistreats, dispossesses, or unduly pressures his father, the trust shall immediately and irrevocably revert to Dennis." And the room seemed to shift, as if the floor had settled and finally gone level after weeks of tilt. Ortega looked up over the rims of his glasses and asked, Did Victor provide you a copy of this? Dennis shook his head and slid his phone across the desk, thumbed open the photo he had taken of the blue ribbon paper Victor had flashed like a prize. Ortega pinched and zoomed without comment, then gave a short lawyer's laugh. More air than humor. Wrong notary seal, wrong font on the attestation, and your wife never included her middle initial on signature lines. This is a forgery, and not a good one, he said. And Dennis felt the heat move from his chest to his hands, a clear, steady anger that did not shake. Ortega pressed a call button, and his paralegal, a woman named Rita with quick eyes, entered with a laptop and a stack of forms already half filled. "We're going to do 3 things immediately," Ortega said, uncapping a pen with a click that sounded final. "First, we send notice to the banks and custodians that the legitimate will is on file and that there has been an attempted fraudulent transfer. That triggers protective freezes on any account Victor touched. Second, we notify the title company and county recorder that your ownership remains unchanged and that any deed presented by your son is presumed invalid. Third, we schedule a meeting for tomorrow at 3 with Victor and his counsel in this office, with a court reporter present. I prefer sunlight. It makes liars squint." Dennis nodded and signed where Rita pointed, and while Ortega dictated emails in crisp sentences, names, dates, instrument numbers, Rita typed at a speed that made the letters blur. The printer warmed and spat, the stapler snapped, and the room filled with the simple sounds of paper turning back into law. When there was a breath between tasks, Dennis asked the question that had been waiting like a weight on his tongue. "Will there be police?" Ortega folded his hands. "There already are," he said, and explained that Arizona's elder abuse statute obligates banks and professionals to report when a senior is displaced by apparent fraud. The bank's compliance team had flagged Victor's sudden requests to move balances and add himself as owner. "Detective Rivas is assigned," he added, sliding over a business card. "She'll want your statement and that photo. She'll also want to know exactly what words Victor used when he moved you out." And Dennis repeated them. "Find somewhere else to die, you're useless now." And Ortega winced as if he had bitten a seed. The paralegal returned with a slim, sealed envelope marked "to be opened if condition triggered," Linda's handwriting straight and firm, and Ortega asked softly, "Would you like to read this here or take it home?" Dennis chose here because here had witnesses and a record, and because he could feel Linda's careful planning walking beside him. Inside, Linda's letter said what the will could not. How she loved her son but feared his impatience with limits. How she had seen him belittle Dennis's practical knowledge. How she believed kindness should be measured in actions, not speeches. It ended with a line that sounded exactly like her. "If there is a dust storm, Denny, follow the fence posts. One at a time, straight and steady." Dennis folded the letter and set it back in its sleeve, and Ortega nodded as if a circle had closed. The lawyer then outlined the next day's choreography. Victor would arrive with a talkative attorney. Ortega would present the original will, the certification, and the triggered clause. The court reporter would swear everyone in and create a transcript that could be handed to a judge by week's end. Detective Rivas would wait in an adjacent conference room in case the forged document appeared. If Victor attempted to argue misunderstanding, Ortega would let him, then ask one clean question. "Did you even read the will?" Dennis could attend, speak if he wished, or sit silent. The law, Ortega promised, would do the talking. By late afternoon, the emails had landed, the freezes had posted, and Rita handed Dennis a thin folder labeled "Actions Today" with a checklist he could understand. Statement to detective, 3 p.m. phone. Utilities notice, Ortega to file. Locksmith, pending court order, probable tomorrow morning. Personal items retrieval, police standby available. Dennis signed one last affidavit confirming his displacement and the timeline. Thursday afternoon removal, Suncrest Inn receipt, cash tip, exact phrases used. And when he finished, Ortega stood and said, "You did the hard part by walking in," then added in a drier tone, "Now we make the paperwork behave again." Dennis stepped back into the bright hallway and felt the air conditioning give way to the heat that rushed in around the elevators. But the heat no longer felt like a hand on his neck. It felt like sunlight on a trail he recognized. Fence posts ahead, spaced evenly. At home. His home, though he would not sleep there yet. He paused on the sidewalk and glanced at the windows, then kept going, because tomorrow the locks would change with a police standby and a court paper, and he would carry Linda's photo box over the threshold himself. That night at the Suncrest, the AC rattled, the ice bucket sweated on the dresser, and Dennis wrote his own list on hotel stationery. 1. Statement. 2. Meeting at 3. 3. Call neighbor Mrs. Ruiz to check mail. 4. Bring letter for courage. He set Linda's envelope beside the list like an anchor, turned off the lamp, and lay in the dark listening to the traffic wash past like distant surf. Somewhere out there, Victor and Kelsey were probably ordering dinner and telling themselves a story in which a ribbon and a lie could beat a signature and a life. But in the morning, a door would open. A court reporter would swear them in, and the question would land in the middle of the table like a stone in still water. And Dennis, who had spent a lifetime building things straight and steady, would watch the ripples show what was true. Dennis arrived at Ortega's office a half hour early the next day because he preferred to be the first one in a room where truth would be measured. And he sat in the quiet conference space with a pitcher of water, a legal pad, and Linda's sealed letter in front of him like tools on a workbench. The blinds were tilted to cut the hot Arizona glare into thin stripes across the table. And a small digital clock in the corner marked time with a soft tick that steadied his breathing. Rita, the paralegal, checked the microphones and placed a small placard that said Court Reporter, Recording, next to a neat stack of exhibits. The original will in a clear sleeve, a certified copy with a barcode, the county recorder index sheet, and a page with the conditional clause highlighted in yellow. Ortega came in at 10 to 3, adjusted his tie, and said, "We will keep this simple," then sat opposite Dennis and uncapped his pen with that same final click. At exactly 3 o'clock, Victor walked in with Kelsey and a lawyer named Garrison, who wore an expensive watch and an expression that said he solved problems by declaring them simple. Victor did not meet Dennis's eyes right away, choosing instead to scan the walls as if looking for a back door in the wood grain, while Kelsey smiled in a way that showed careful teeth. The court reporter swore everyone in, read the case caption for the record, and Ortega began with introductions so clean and even they sounded like square fence posts being set in a straight line. Then he slid the clear sleeve forward, the one with Linda's familiar signature, and said, "Exhibit A is the original will of Linda Mae O'Malley, executed and notarized on March 3rd. Exhibit B is the certified copy. Exhibit C is the recorder index. Exhibit D is the conditional clause your mother included regarding your treatment of your father." And as he spoke, he tapped each page lightly with the back of his pen to make the points land in the right places. Victor's lawyer cleared his throat and said, "We have a certified document reflecting a later change." And he reached into a leather folder, but Ortega lifted a hand and with a dry smile asked Victor in a voice that was almost kind, "Before we go further, Mr. O'Malley, did you even read the will you say you relied on?" The room held its breath. Victor blinked, then said, "My mother and I discussed updates. She wanted her legacy protected." And Dennis heard the sentence shape itself like a rehearsed line that did not fit the mouth speaking it. Ortega rotated Exhibit D toward Victor and read aloud Linda's sentence, slow and clear. "If my son Victor mistreats, dispossesses, or unduly pressures his father after my death, the trust I leave him shall immediately and irrevocably revert to Dennis." Then he added, "You moved your father to a motel and told him he was useless. That is mistreatment. The condition is triggered." Garrison tried to interrupt. "We dispute the characterization." But Ortega simply slid forward the county index showing the house still in Dennis's name and said, "There is no characterization here, only documents and actions." Kelsey's phone vibrated on the table, screen lighting with a string of messages. "Declined, declined, verification required." And she flipped it face down with a stiff smile that said she had not expected the bank freeze to feel so immediate. Victor finally looked at his father and said, "Dad, no one wants a fight. Let's just reorganize." But his voice had gone thin and dry, like paper left on a dashboard. Ortega's pen clicked again, and he said, "Mr. O'Malley, please describe for the record the document your son showed you." And Dennis kept his eyes on the table as he answered, "Blue ribbon, wrong seal, wrong font, middle initial?" Linda never used, a notary name he had never heard, a date that did not match the day Linda had met with Ortega. Rita marked each point, and the court reporter's keys fluttered like small wings. Then Ortega looked toward the door and said, "Detective Rivas, if you please." And a compact woman with a badge and a steady gaze stepped in carrying a manila folder. She nodded to the court reporter, set the folder down, and said, "We have camera footage of a document service used 2 days before the funeral, an email chain between a contract paralegal and a Gmail account in Kelsey's maiden name discussing matching seals, and a copy of the so-called update missing the recorder's stamp. Mr. O'Malley," she turned to Victor, "who prepared the paper you showed your father?" Victor's jaw worked. He glanced at Garrison, who held up a smoothing hand and said, "Detective, this is a civil matter." And Rivas replied calmly, "Elder exploitation and forgery are criminal matters in this state." Then turned back to Victor and waited. The little digital clock ticked 5 quiet seconds. Victor said, "A friend helped," and Kelsey, still staring at her face-down phone, whispered, "It's a misunderstanding." As if softening the word would undo its weight, Ortega organized his exhibits again, precise as a man sorting bolts by size, and said for the record that banks had already frozen all accounts tied to the trust and to Linda's estate pending verification, that the title company had placed an alert against any transfer, and that utilities listed in Victor's name would be reverted within 24 hours. Garrison tried a different route and offered a temporary accommodation. Dennis could return to the house if he agreed not to file criminal complaints and to accept a reasonable stipend in place of his 70%, at which Ortega actually stopped, looked over his glasses, and said, "My client already owns the house and the accounts. What you are offering is to stop breaking the law in exchange for our gratitude. We decline." And Dennis, who had not spoken much, added quietly, "You threw me out of my home and handed me motel money. I am not the one who needs an accommodation." And for the first time since they sat down, Victor looked small in his new suit. Detective Rivas gathered her folder and stood. She did not reach for cuffs, because this was not that moment, but she asked Garrison to have his client's phones available later that afternoon for imaging, and said an evidence technician would need the document. Victor had brandished in Dennis's kitchen. The court reporter read back one key exchange at Ortega's request. The question, "Did you even read the will?" And the long silence after it. And then Ortega ended the meeting cleanly, instructing that all communications go through his office, that any attempt to enter the house without consent would prompt an immediate call to police, and that a locksmith had been scheduled for the morning with a standby officer present. Victor rose and finally looked at Dennis fully, and for a second the old boy seemed to flicker under the man, a kid with scraped knees, a son asking how to hold a hammer. But it passed. He tugged his cuff, said, "This isn't over," and Garrison hustled them out. When the door closed, the room breathed again. Ortega capped his pen and said, "The record is the record. We keep walking." And Dennis nodded and pressed his hand over Linda's letter, the way you lay a palm on solid wood to feel its strength. Outside, the heat pressed against the glass and made the downtown buildings shimmer like mirages. But inside, the mystery had lost some of its fog. The wrong seal, the phone messages, the email chain, the way Kelsey's maiden name had floated up like a clue from silt, the way Victor had not said yes or no when asked if he'd read the will. Dennis left the office with a copy of the transcript in a slim envelope, a written confirmation of the bank freezes, and a schedule. Statement at precinct at 5, locksmith at 9, utilities reversion by noon. He stepped into the elevator, caught a glimpse of himself in the brushed metal. Older, yes, lined, yes, but standing straight, and felt the strange calm that comes when a bad story is finally being told in the right order. The mystery had started with a ribbon and a lie at his own table. Now it sat in typed lines on official paper, moving toward a judge who would see what Linda had seen and written down in her tidy hand. Follow the fence posts, one at a time, straight and steady. Dennis kept his promise to the schedule Ortega had set, and at 5 o'clock sharp he walked into the precinct with a manila folder under his arm and the motel receipt folded inside, like proof that the last few days had really happened. Detective Rivas met him in a small interview room that smelled faintly of coffee and copier toner, set a recorder on the table, and asked him to tell it in order from the moment Victor arrived with the blue ribbon paper to the rattling AC at the Suncrest Inn. And he did, slow and careful, naming times, places, words, and even the way Victor checked his watch while Dennis packed shirts in the photo box. She took the motel receipt, made a copy of the phone photo of the fake will, wrote down the exact phrase, "Find somewhere else to die. You're useless now," and asked him to repeat it twice for clarity, then slid a printed form across for his signature, and handed him a small card with the case number, her email, and one instruction. If Victor or Kelsey called, let it go to voicemail, and send the recording to her and to Ortega. She said the bank had already confirmed attempted access flags on 2 accounts, that a judge was reviewing a warrant for the document service used to create the fake, and that a patrol car would stand by in the morning while a locksmith changed Dennis's locks. He thanked her, tucked the card in his wallet, and stepped back into the orange evening heat, feeling the strange mix of anger and relief that comes when a story is finally being written down in the right order. At the motel, he slept in short pieces, woke before dawn, drank thin lobby coffee, and rode the bus back to his street where a white locksmith van and a marked cruiser idled at the curb like early birds waiting for the sun. The officer introduced himself as Tran, calm and watchful, and the locksmith Manny, a lean man with a sun-cracked smile, held up a new brushed nickel deadbolt and said they'd do the front, the side garage door, and the back slider's keyed bar, rekey them all to one code, and add long screws to the strike plates because short ones were for people who trusted too much. Dennis laughed once at that, and then stopped because it was too close to truth. Manny worked fast, wood shavings soft as paper falling to the welcome mat, metal pieces clicking on the porch table like coins, while Officer Tran walked the perimeter and noted a pile of half-unpacked boxes inside the front room, 2 rolling suitcases in the hall, a laptop on the kitchen counter with a sticky note that said Wi-Fi Casa Hayes, and a folder labeled Renovation Kitchen Gut with a drawing of a wine wall where Linda's bookcase stood. Dennis took pictures of everything with his phone because Ortega had said to document before touching. Then he opened the windows and let hot, dry air push through the rooms like a broom. Manny finished and handed over 3 keys stamped "Do Not Duplicate" and a simple rule, no spare under a rock. And Dennis signed the invoice with a steady hand while Officer Tran gave him a case update. Utilities would revert by noon under the emergency order. Any attempt by Victor to enter without Dennis's permission would be treated as criminal trespass given the active investigation. And if anyone showed up angry, call 911, not Pride. When the patrol car left, Dennis moved through the house room by room, setting his life back where it fit. Linda's quilt folded on the end of the bed, the pear tree dish towel straight on the oven handle, the photo box on the piano, her letter in its sleeve on the mantel like a compass. Then he gathered Victor and Kelsey's things into large contractor bags, zipped them, and set them on the porch under the eaves with a note in plain print. Your belongings. Do not enter. Contact Ortega. At 11, his phone chimed with a bank message that new credentials for consolidated accounts were ready at the branch with proof of identity. And 5 minutes later, Ortega called to say the judge had signed the utility and possession orders, that the title alert was live, and that he'd heard from Rivas. Video from the print shop showed a clerk handing over a sealed envelope to a woman using Kelsey's maiden name 2 days before the funeral. Dennis said, "Thank you," and then said nothing for a while, listening to the house settle like a big animal returning to the place it knew. Just after noon, Mrs. Ruiz from next door tapped on the open front door and peered in with kind eyes and a plate of cookies. She said there had been a man in a dark car yesterday taking photos, and a woman with a camera who left a card from Channel 8 about elder fraud. And Dennis took the card, said he wasn't talking to anyone yet, but thanked her for watching the house. They stood for a minute in the cool front room, and she pointed at the Renovation Kitchen Gut folder and made a face and said Linda would haunt anyone who tried to rip out those cabinets. And he laughed the first full laugh since the funeral. At 1, a call came from an unknown number. And he let it roll to voicemail and then listened to Victor's voice crackle through with the odd mix of apology and instruction. "Dad, I'm sorry, but you're making this worse. Let's meet at the house and sort it." And he forwarded the audio to Rivas and to Ortega without replying. At 2, the utility company pinged his email confirming service restored in his name, and the internet modem blinked back to life as if it had been holding its breath. At 3, Rivas texted, "Search warrant executed. Forgery equipment and email trail secured. Expect arraignment this evening. Do not engage if they show up." At 4, a silver SUV slowed in front of the house, and Kelsey climbed out in sunglasses, marched up the walk, and reached for the knob like she still had a right to touch it. But the new deadbolt turned her hand into a fist, and Dennis, standing inside with the chain on and his phone open to 911, said through the door that her things were on the porch and all communication must go through counsel. Her smile cracked. Words came sharp. "You're being dramatic? This is a misunderstanding." And he said, simple as a level on a board, "The police call it elder abuse. The lawyer calls it fraud. I call it my home." An Officer Tran's cruiser rolled around the corner like punctuation at the end of a sentence. Lights off, but presence loud. The officer reminded Kelsey a report was on file. A meeting had been held with counsel, and any attempt to force entry would result in arrest. She backed down the walk, eyes burning, and left without the bags. The sun slid lower, turning the stucco warm and the bougainvillea too bright to stare at. And Dennis made coffee in Linda's chipped mug, sat at the kitchen table, and opened the banker's envelope. Ortega had messengered over. New account numbers, a clean ledger of balances, a cautious plan that looked like Linda had written it herself. Simple funds, insured deposits, nothing fancy. He placed the plan under a magnet on the fridge where their grandkids' drawings used to go, then carried Linda's letter back to the study and read the line about dust storms and fence posts again until the words felt as solid as wood. Near dusk, his phone buzzed with a last update. Arrested during dinner, both out on bond by morning, no contact terms in place. Sleep, from Rivas. And he texted back, "Thank you," and turned off the lights room by room, touching the frames as he passed, hearing the house breathe. For the first time since the funeral, he lay down in his own bed, the ceiling fan whispering above, "The night sounds right again," and he told Linda in a voice just above a whisper what had happened that day. The locks, the keys, the photos, the officer, the bags on the porch, the sun on the cabinets she loved. He said he was following the fence posts, one at a time, straight and steady, and that the mystery that started with a ribbon and a lie was now moving under its own clean weight toward court, toward answers, toward a kind of justice that didn't shout, just held fast. The next morning, Dennis woke before the sun, brewed coffee in Linda's chipped mug, and sat at the kitchen table listening to the refrigerator hum, trying to believe that the house was his again and would stay that way. At 8:30, his phone buzzed with a short text from Detective Rivas. Arraigned last night, both released on bond. No contact terms in place. And he put the phone down and breathed out slowly, because the words meant this would not be over in a day. It would be a process with forms and dates and rooms where people spoke into microphones. At 9:15, a dark SUV eased to the curb and a woman stepped out as if she were stepping onto a stage. Tall, composed, diamond steady even in morning light. And when she rang the bell, she said her name through the screen with the authority of a person who expected doors to open. "Eleanor Hayes. I'm Kelsey's mother. We need to talk." Dennis kept the chain on, asked her what about, and she smiled without warmth and said, "About ending this before it ruins what's left of your family's life." And he opened the door only as far as the chain would allow and let her into the entry once he saw that she came alone. She sat on the edge of Linda's sofa like a judge at a bench, opened a leather folio, and laid out her offer the way one lays out cards in a game she expected to win. $5 million now, another 2 when you sign today. You keep this house and your dignity. In return, you withdraw complaints, stop the press calls, and agree to strict confidentiality. We all move on. Dennis watched her mouth form the numbers and felt a small quiet inside himself sharpen, the same quiet he used to feel on a ladder before the last nail. And he asked, "Why would I take money for what is already mine?" Eleanor did not blink, only turned a page and changed tools. her voice smooth as a countertop. Because I have very good accountants. Your late wife's bookkeeping firm moved funds for trucking cooperatives up and down I-10 and I-17 with histories that would interest federal agents. If I make one call, money laundering becomes the word in every story. The government can seize assets that smell wrong. At your age, is that a risk you want? The room seemed to tilt a degree as the words settled, but Dennis held the chain of the thought the way he held the chain on the door and said, "Linda kept clean books." And Eleanor's smile widened 0.5 millimeter, and she said, "Everyone says that until a subpoena arrives," then shut the folio, stood, and added a final line on the threshold, soft and sharp. "You don't have to like me, Mr. O'Malley. You just have to be realistic." And left her perfume and a thin film of threat behind. Dennis watched the SUV pull away, closed the door, and called Ortega at once, telling the story in order, every sentence, every word, even the way Eleanor had said realistic like it meant obedient, and Ortega listened without interrupting and then said in a voice that grew harder on each step, "We do not negotiate with extortion. If there is a federal angle, we will be the ones to raise it. I'm sending you a number. Private investigator. Best in the county. She will meet you in an hour." At 10:30, a lean woman in a ball cap and boots knocked, introduced herself as Carol Chen, looked around the entry and then the hall like a contractor reading studs behind drywall, and asked, "Home office?" Dennis led her to the room where Linda had kept her files, careful and labeled, and he felt his throat tighten because even the smell in there was still Linda. Paper, pencil shavings, lemon oil. Carol put on gloves, took photos of the room, pulled a new portable scanner from her bag, and said, "We are going to collect, not disturb. If we find anything that changes the picture, we log it and call Ortega." And Dennis nodded and stood by the doorway, hands in pockets to keep from touching. Carol opened the lateral file one drawer at a time and made a sound between a hum and a whistle. Approval at the labels. Vendors. Active. Vendors closed. 1099 archive. Coop I-10. Notes. Client pressure. And pulled 3 thin notebooks from the last row, spiral-bound with pencil writing on the side. Ledger, flagged. She flipped one open, scanned, and read aloud a line that sounded exactly like Linda's voice written in pencil. Odd deposit request. No contract provided. Declined. Advised client to seek another firm. Email to self-re-pressure. Then turned a page and said, "She kept evidence when people tried to push her." And Dennis felt his shoulders loosen a notch. Carol ran a fingertip under the drawer lip and found a small notch, pressed, and a false back clicked. Behind it lay a fireproof box with a simple key taped under the desk. Dennis's breath hitched because he remembered Linda saying months ago, "If life throws you a dust storm, you'll have a map." And now the map looked like a gray box. They opened it on the desk pad and found a sealed envelope with Ortega's name, a laminated card for Sarah Martinez, forensic accountant, FBI Phoenix, a flash drive labeled in Linda's neat capital letters, "If they push," and a short note on a sticky, "Denny, if this is open, breathe, then call Sam, then call Sarah." Dennis sat down and put both hands flat on the desk to steady himself while Carol photographed each item, bagged the flash drive, and said, "We'll view on a clean laptop. No internet. We preserve metadata." She plugged it into her machine, navigated to folders named simply email copies, declined clients, pressure, calls, and opened a PDF where Linda had printed emails from 2 years earlier when a client tied to a small trucking coupe asked her to smooth cash entries. Linda's reply was firm and polite. "We do not book phantom loads. Please find another firm. This is my final answer." And attached was a scan of a handwritten log of a phone call where someone said, "You'll be sorry you're so rigid." And Linda wrote in pencil below, "If they push, push back with light." Carol leaned back, exhaled, and said, "Your wife wasn't washing money. She was building a record for when someone claimed she did." And Dennis swallowed hard and nodded because he could hear Linda saying it, heard her joking voice. Light is better than drama. When she put more nightlights in the hall for grandkid visits, Carol opened the sealed envelope to Ortega with Dennis's permission and read a one-page letter dated 6 months before Linda died, written in that same steady hand, explaining why she changed the will, why Victor's trust had a condition, and why she had started documenting client pressure more carefully. "I love my son. I do not love his impatience with rules. If anyone, client or family, tries to bend truth with paper after I die, this package should help hold the line. Carol slid the letter back into the envelope, made a log entry, and said, "We're ready for the next call." And Dennis, who had been holding the FBI card like a fragile piece of glass, set it on the desk and pressed the speakerphone button with a finger that did not shake. Agent Sarah Martinez answered on the third ring with a clean "Martinez," and Carol introduced herself, gave her license number, said she was sitting with Dennis O'Malley at his late wife's desk with ledgers and a drive that might touch federal interests, and asked if the agent had 10 minutes today. Martinez said she had 20, asked them to come to a conference room at Ortega's office at 2, and told them to bring the box sealed and the drive in a bag, no stops, no side conversations. Dennis ended the call and sat very still while Carol reassembled the office exactly as she found it, labeled the box with a temporary evidence tag, and tucked Linda's sticky note on top where he could see the words that made his throat tight again. "If this is open, breathe." And when they left the room, he paused on the threshold and said aloud to the quiet air, "I'm breathing, Lynn." Then followed Carol to the truck. On the way downtown, he called Ortega and said, "We have a box and a name." And Ortega said, "I'll have coffee and a recorder ready." And Dennis looked out the window at the bright, flat streets and felt the shape of the mystery change under him, the way a dirt road changes when you hit pavement. This was not just a fight over a house. This was a pattern of pressure and paper Linda had seen coming and had prepared for with pencil, folders, and a card for a federal agent. At 2 o'clock, he would sit at a long table again and listen to someone ask plain questions with a recorder running. And he would answer in order, and the truth would keep moving forward, fence post to fence post, straight and steady. At 2 o'clock sharp, Dennis sat in Ortega's conference room with the gray fireproof box on the table, the flash drive in a clear evidence bag, and Linda's sealed letter beside his coffee. And when Agent Sarah Martinez walked in with a leather notebook and a calm look, she introduced herself, started a small digital recorder, and asked Dennis to tell the story in order one more time. He did, from the blue ribbon paper to the motel AC to Eleanor's visit and threat, and Carol Chen added where she found each ledger and how the false panel in the file cabinet released with a notch. Martinez logged the chain of custody, time, place, who handed what to whom, then slit the tape, lifted the lid, and read Linda's pencil notes with her finger under each line, like a teacher who did not miss words, pausing at, "If they push, push back with light," before looking up and saying, "Your wife was careful, Mr. O'Malley. This is not the handwriting of a person who hides things. It is the handwriting of a person who builds a record." And she explained in plain language that asset seizure cases depended on dirty money actually touching a person's hands, not on rumors in a hallway or threats from a mother-in-law. Carol plugged the drive into a clean laptop they'd brought, no internet, and opened the folders one by one, while Martinez photographed the screen with a dated placard in frame. Email copies, declined clients, pressure, calls. And the agent nodded when she saw the forwarded emails and the refusal lines. "We do not book phantom loads." And she said those sentences mattered because they showed intent to stay clean when a client pushed. Then Martinez closed the box again and said the next step was simple but important. A controlled follow-up with Eleanor, because extortion only sings when it knows it's being heard. And she asked Dennis if he would be willing to let them record a call and, if needed, a short, safe, in-person meeting. Dennis said yes in a quiet voice that held steady, and Ortega, who had been listening with his elbows on the table, said he would sit in the next room, and that the house now had long screws in the strike plates and a fresh deadbolt. At 3:30, they placed Dennis's phone on speaker and dialed the number from Eleanor's card. She answered on the second ring with the same cool tone, "Eleanor Hayes." And Dennis said in a simple way that he had thought about her offer and needed to understand what she meant about federal trouble and trucking money. And Eleanor, hearing the door open again, walked right through it, saying, "It means men with badges and boxes, Mr. O'Malley. It means they take first and ask later, sign today and you never meet them." And Martinez, listening through an earpiece in the next room, wrote 3 words, clear threat noted. then slid a small black device from her bag and, with Dennis's nod, arranged an evening meet in his living room at 7. To sign with witnesses, Eleanor said, and hung up after promising to bring proper papers and a confidentiality rider. The next 3 hours moved like work you do right before a storm. Agent Martinez called for a technical team and 2 agents to stage nearby. Ortega called Officer Tran to request a quiet patrol car to pass by at 7:15. Carol checked the living room for clean angles and placed a recording unit under the coffee table where the wood lip hid the diode light. And Dennis brewed coffee because that is what he knew to do when a long hour has to be crossed. At 6:45, the house felt smaller, the bougainvillea shadows long across the stucco. The recorder tested with a soft clap, the front chain set, the study door cracked for the agents, and Dennis sat on the edge of Linda's sofa with the old pear tree dish towel folded beside him as if it could steady his hands. At 7 exactly, the bell rang once, firm, and Eleanor stepped in when he opened to the chain, again alone, again bright with diamonds, again smelling like a store that sells important things, and Dennis unlatched the chain because Martinez had said to act normal, and Eleanor smiled like a verdict and placed her leather folio on the coffee table, pulling out a typed settlement, a cashier's check stub, and a 1-page gag order with lines for signatures. She began her speech as if she had practiced it in the car. This is not an admission by anyone. This is mercy for an old man. It protects your house and gives you comfort. And Dennis, who had stained so many boards with his hands, simply asked questions the way Martinez taught him in the hall, open and clear. What happens if I don't sign today? And who told you about my late wife's clients? And what did you mean when you said papers are flexible when people are motivated? Eleanor did not blink and said, "If you refuse, I will call a friend at a federal office before I reach the end of your block. As for who told me, let's say my daughter married into a family that understands documents, and flexible means exactly what your son showed you on your dining table." And as she spoke, she tapped the gag order with a polished nail, as if the paper could act on its own. Dennis set Linda's letter on the table, so the sentence about fence posts faced up and said one more line for the recorder. "Are you offering me money to stop the police and the bank and the court from seeing evidence?" And Eleanor's eyes flashed annoyed and she answered, "I am offering you $7 million to end the story and keep your name out of any file that matters." And that was the cue. The study door opened, and Agent Martinez stepped in with 2 agents behind her, badges out, voices professional and calm. "Mrs. Hayes, federal agents, please place your phone and the folio on the table and keep your hands where we can see them. We have a warrant to collect communications and documents relating to your attempt to influence Mr. O'Malley's decisions by threats of criminal exposure." And for the first time, Eleanor's posture lost an inch. Then she gathered herself and tried a different tone. "You cannot barge into a private home over a misunderstanding." And Martinez answered in the same even voice, "We were invited by the homeowner. We have a warrant, and extortion is not a misunderstanding." Then handed her a copy and asked for the passcode to the phone. Eleanor refused, so an agent began a standard lockout procedure and bagged the device while Martinez photographed the gag order and the cashier's check stub. And in the next room, Ortega called Officer Tran with a simple update code they had agreed upon if things turned loud. They did not, because Eleanor had many tools, but yelling was not one of them. And after the collection, she stood, gathered what she was permitted to keep, and said last words that sounded like a warning, but also like a line falling flat. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." And Martinez replied, "We will," then walked her to the door. The house breathed again when it closed, and Martinez sat in Linda's chair at the dining table and explained what would happen now. The forensics team would image the phone and search emails for any plan between Eleanor and Kelsey to pressure Dennis. The U.S. attorney would review the file for attempted extortion. And the county case on the forged would move forward on its own track with Detective Rivas's evidence. She warned Dennis that Victor might try to call from a different number despite the no-contact order. And if he did, to let it go to voicemail and send the recording to both offices. Dennis nodded, And as if on cue, his phone buzzed with a number that looked like a gas station line, then buzzed again, and he silenced it and slid it to Martinez, who tapped record and let it ring out. When the room grew quiet, the agent stood and thanked him for trusting a plan that asked him to sit with his fear and still speak. And Dennis, looking at the dark window where his reflection sat small between the bougainvillea leaves, said in a plain voice that fear had been his companion since Linda's chair went empty, but that tonight felt different, like stepping off desert dust onto a paved road. Martinez smiled once, quick, professional, kind, and left with her team and the boxed evidence, and Dennis locked the door, turned the new deadbolt, and set the chain, then poured the coffee he had forgotten to drink and sat on the sofa with Linda's letter in his hands, reading the line about dust storms and fence posts until the words steadied inside him again. And when the house settled, he told the quiet room what had happened, step by step, in case Linda was listening. The recorder under the table, the folio on the wood, the way light had settled on the gag order like dust on a shelf, and the way the agent said extortion is not a misunderstanding, which sounded to Dennis like the desert itself speaking plain. 6 months later, the desert heat felt different on Dennis's skin, not like a hand pushing him down, but like a steady weight he had learned to carry. And on a bright Thursday, he stood on the porch of 114 West Bethany, watered the bougainvillea Linda had planted, and thought about how a story that started with a blue ribbon and a lie had ended up in 3 courtrooms and a conference room with a federal seal on the wall. The first ending had come quick. Only a week after the night Eleanor sat in his living room tapping a gag order, Agent Martinez called to say the phone forensics showed a string of messages between Eleanor and Kelsey, planning pressure points for the old man, and an audio note Eleanor sent herself in the car, rehearsing the words realistic and federal like lines in a play. The U.S. attorney filed a narrow charge, attempted extortion, then offered a deal if Eleanor admitted what she did and handed over every email and contact from the so-called document service. And Dennis did not go to that hearing because Ortega said he did not have to. But he read the transcript later and saw the simple parts: the folio, the diamonds, the word money laundering said as a bluff, and the way the judge said, "This is not how we resolve family disputes in this state." The second ending belonged to the county case where the forged paper lived, and that hearing was not dramatic. No shouting, no surprises, only Detective Rivas laying out the camera footage from the print shop, the email chain under Kelsey's maiden name about matching seals, the bank compliance report about attempted access, and the Suncrest Inn receipt with Dennis's signature in the corner like a small flag. And at the end, Victor and Kelsey stood, faces closed, and heard the judge read the words felony forgery, conspiracy, and vulnerable adult, and listened to their lawyer ask for mercy. They each took a plea to spare a longer fight. 18 months for Victor on the forgery and attempted exploitation, 12 for Kelsey on conspiracy and false filings, with a no-contact order as long as parole lasted. And when the judge asked Dennis if he wished to speak, he shook his head, because the record already held the only sentence he needed. Did you even read the will? The third ending was quieter and belonged to Linda, to the pencil notes and the flash drive in the gray box, to the way she wrote, "If they push back with light." And the FBI's case on the trucking co-ops did not end with a dramatic raid on his street, but with letters and sealed filings, and at the very end, a small envelope addressed to Mr. Dennis Patrick O'Malley from Agent Martinez, containing a form thank you and a personal note in neat blue ink. Your wife's files helped us confirm intent in 2 matters. She kept clean books. You can say that out loud if anyone ever tries to twist her name. And Dennis placed the note in Linda's ledgers, where it fit like a last tab in a drawer. In the day-by-day that filled the space between those endings, the house became itself again. Not just by locks and paperwork, but by small things. Linda's quilt folded at the bedfoot, the pear tree dish towel hanging straight, the piano dusted, the study aired out until the room smelled like paper and sunlight instead of worry. And Dennis learned to load the dishwasher the way Linda had insisted. Plates toward the spray, bowls tilted, nothing stacked. And he laughed once when he caught himself scolding no one for doing it wrong. Money moved the way Linda had planned, quiet and boring. And Ortega introduced him to a plain-spoken advisor who showed him how to keep it quiet and boring forever. And one afternoon, after reading a letter from a church friend about another widower being pushed by a nephew with access to a printer, Dennis felt something settle in him and called Ortega and said he wanted to pay for a few hours of a good lawyer's time for anyone who showed up with a Suncrest Inn receipt and a forged ribbon. And Ortega said that was a generous idea and suggested they call it the Fence Post Fund. The mystery never had a single answer. He realized when he walked at sunset and felt the heat fall off the day, it had steps. Who made the paper? Who spoke the threats? Who would stand when the room went quiet? And each step had to be taken in order. No skips, no leaps, just the plain work of naming what happened and letting the record hold it. Channel 8 knocked twice over those months, then left polite emails that he forwarded to Ortega with the same 3 words every time. Not yet, thanks. Because he did not need lights or cameras to feel finished. And Mrs. Ruiz from next door brought tamales and gossip about a cousin at the courthouse who said the judge had used the case in a lecture to interns about why conditions matter. And Dennis listened and thanked her and sent a plate back with cookies he had bought at the bakery. Linda liked, admitting to Mrs. Ruiz that he still could not bake, not even brownies from a box. Sometimes, late. The phone would buzz with a new number and a message would arrive in a voice he knew too well, shorter now and stripped of rehearsal. Dad, I'm working. I'm taking classes. I'm sorry. And Dennis would send those to Ortega and Rivas and then go sit in the yard and tell the night what he would someday tell Victor if the day came when an apology meant change. You were not punished for being my son. You were punished for being a forger. He kept the contractor bags from that first day stacked in the garage until a courier from Garrison's office came for them with a receipt. And he signed and watched the bags go and thought of how Kelsey had once adjusted the oven magnets without asking and how small that seemed now. A tiny rehearsal for a bigger move. One Saturday, he drove to the branch with clean account numbers, shook hands with the manager who had carried 2 frozen credentials through the swirl, and returned home with a folder full of documents set to autopilot, the way Linda liked it. And that afternoon, he stood in the studio he had made out of a corner of the garage and built a low bench for the front porch, cutting the boards square, pre-drilling the holes, running long screws into the studs because Manny the locksmith was right. Short ones are for people who trust too much. On the first night the bench sat by the door, he drank coffee under the porch light and reread Linda's letter, not the will, the other one, the one marked, to be opened if condition triggered. And he smiled when he reached the line about dust storms and fence posts, and wrote it on a yellow sticky and put it on the inside of the front door where he would see it every time he stepped out. Agent Martinez came by once, weeks after the last hearing. Not as an agent on duty, but as a person who wanted to drop off a printed copy of a public report that mentioned Linda without naming her. And they stood in the doorway and talked about nothing for 5 minutes. Coffee, heat, the kind of shoes that survive Phoenix sidewalks. And when she left, she said, "Your wife made my job easy." And Dennis answered, "She made a lot of things easier than they had any right to be." And after he closed the door, he felt the kind of sadness that is not a wound anymore, but a seam, something sewn shut carefully by time and work. On the exact day the no-contact order turned 4 months old, a letter came with Victor's handwriting on the front, careful and a little stiff. And inside was a poem someone else had written about regret, and a paragraph that did not ask for money, or a house, or a meeting, only said, "I read Mom's letter in Ortega's office and realized she knew me better than I wanted to be known." And Dennis put that letter beside Linda's and thought, not yet, not now, but maybe someday when the heat is less and the fence posts are all in, we will sit on the bench and talk about hammers. That night, as the cicadas sang and the AC hummed the way Manny had tuned it, he locked the new deadbolt with the long screws and set the chain and turned off lights in a house that felt both old and new. And before he slept, he spoke aloud to the empty room, the number of things he had learned since the day a ribbon and a lie landed on his table. That signatures matter, that paper can be bent, but records bend back. That the person you were for 43 years can still teach you how to survive after she's gone. And that when someone tells you to find somewhere else to die, you can find, by law, by light, by steady hands, the place where you live.